The impacts of a general education environmental studies course on student environmental attitudes. Clifford, Blizard, and Srabasti, Dutta, Division of General Education. Introduction. Environmental scientists have long recognized the extent to which the everyday actions of human beings are having dramatic and devastating impacts on Earth's climate and ecosystems. In order to mitigate these challenges, environmental educators strive to promote awareness of and concern for the fate of our environment among the public. One key component of this task entails determining how other humans actually feel and act regarding climate change, pollution, and ecological destruction. Collecting and analyzing data on human feelings about the environment enables educators to develop and modify environmental study curricula in an endeavor to enhance levels of concern for the environment and thus encourage more pro-environmental behaviors. According to Milfont and Duckett, an environmental attitude is a psychological tendency expressed by evaluating the natural environment with some degree of favor or disfavor. Environmental attitudes inventory. In order to measure environmental attitudes, Milfont and Duckett developed the Environmental Attitudes Inventory, a survey instrument that considered 12 scales: enjoyment of nature, support for interventionist conservation policies, environmental movement activism, conservation motivated by anthropogenic concern, confidence in science and technology to solve environmental problems, environmental fragility, altering nature, belief that humans ought to do this, personal conservation behavior, human dominance over nature, human utilization of nature, ecocentric concern, and support for population growth policies. The EAI was later optimized by Sutton and Gyuris so that it maintained all 12 dimensions while asking fewer questions. Purpose of the study. The purpose of this investigation was to evaluate the environmental attitudes of undergraduate students enrolled in Ashford University, using the Environmental Attitudes Inventory as revised by Sutton and Gyuris. As such, this is the first published study to focus on the environmental outlook of students in a fully online university context. In particular, we sought to determine the extent to which students' perspectives on the environment may have been affected by completing an introductory level general education course in environmental studies, SCI 207, Our Dependence Upon the Environment. We also investigated possible relationships between students' environmental attitudes and their demographic characteristics, specifically gender, age, and race. Ashford meets the needs of a diverse population of largely non-traditional learners, including many who come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds and/or are first-generation college students. All Ashford students are required to meet certain core competencies. SCI 207 fulfills the scientific reasoning competency. In this age of numerous regional and global environmental challenges, it's vital that schools support students in developing the environmental knowledge, awareness, and concern to take on the role of socially responsible and engaged citizens. Developing a baseline for the extent to which Ashford's environmental science course is fostering such attitudes of concern provides an invaluable starting place for efforts to make future changes to the course in order to promote this goal. Methods of the study. An invitation to complete the Environmental Attitudes Inventory of Sutton and Gyuris was emailed to all currently enrolled Ashford University students. Students who opted to participate in our study were asked to rank each item using a 7-point Likert scale. The survey also included demographic questions related to age, race, marital status, gender, and military status. A total of 763 students answered all the questions of the survey, out of which 355 students had successfully completed SCI 207, and the other 408 anticipated taking the course in the future. In all, 170 male students and 593 female students completed the EAI. Demography of respondents. The various demographics of the respondents are provided in the graphs below. Note that the distribution of respondents by race, ethnicity did not closely match that of Ashford University as a whole. Age of respondents. Descriptive statistics. Higher sample means were obtained for scales 1, 2, 3, 6, 8, and 11. These results indicate that the respondents in this sample generally valued nature for its own sake. Students also scored low on those scales that support dominating nature and using it for our own needs. Environmental attitude in SCI 207. Respondents were divided into two groups: successful, that had completed the Science 207 and anticipated who plan on taking it in the future. Independent sample t-tests were conducted and statistically significant results obtained for scale 4, conservation motivated by anthropocentric concern, and 7, altering nature. These findings indicate that successful students were less likely to support conservation for purely human benefit and were less likely to support altering nature for human purposes than anticipated students. Environmental attitudes and gender. Independent sample t-tests were conducted to find out if there were any significant environmental attitude differences between males and females. For each of the 4 statistically significant scales, the mean male score was higher than the mean female score. Confidence in science and technology, altering nature, human dominance over nature, and support for population growth policies. Environmental attitudes and age. Analyses showed that none of the scales indicated any statistically significant significance in regard to age. Environmental attitudes and race. In terms of race ethnicity, scales 1, 2, 6, 11, and 12 showed statistical significance, and thus we rejected the null hypothesis for each one. Post hoc analyses indicate that the difference lies between African American and white, African American and Hispanic, and African American and other races. African Americans score lower on all but scale 11, where other races scored lower. Conclusion. This investigation sought to characterize the environmental attitudes of students attending Ashford University, an online institute of higher learning serving majority-minority non-traditional students. In particular, researchers examined the possible impacts of SCI 207, a general education course in environmental studies, on respondents' environmental outlooks. In general, respondents valued nature for its own sake and did not support using nature for our own purposes or controlling it. Because this is the first known study to evaluate environmental attitudes at an online university, it is difficult to compare these findings with those of other institutions. As one example, Koch and Kuvak used the EAI to assess pre-service science teachers in a Turkish university. Students scored high for enjoyment of nature, environmental movement activism, and environmental fragility. Conclusion, statistical significance. The only statistically significant differences between EAI respondents who had taken SCI 207 and those who did not yet done so pertain to attitudes about our right to alter nature for our own benefit and conserving nature for our own purposes. In both cases, respondents who had taken the course showed a slight shift in favor of nature having value apart from its usefulness to humans. This did not, however, translate into statistically significant differences in environmental behaviors or level of ecocentric concern. Conclusion, confounding factors. In order to identify possible confounding factors in this study, we evaluated demographic differences between respondents in regard to gender, age, and race. In terms of gender, mean male score was statistically higher than the mean female score in 4 cases. Wagner and Wiseman found that boys tended to score higher in the utilitarian domain that supports the mastering nature and valuing nature as it satisfies human needs. We obtained similar results, as males scored higher in altering nature and human dominance over nature. Males also showed greater confidence in science and technology than females, along with greater support for population growth policies. Conclusion, statistically significant differences. Several statistically significant differences emerged in regard to race ethnicity. African Americans generally showed a lower level of enjoyment in nature, support for conservation policies, confidence in science and technology, support for population growth policies, and ecocentric concern than other racial groups. These findings reflect those of Johnson, Boker, and Cordell, who reported that African Americans tended to score lower on the new environmental paradigm survey than most other ethnic groups. It should be noted, however, that racial demographics of the respondents did not match that of Ashford as a whole. How the study is used. Overall, the findings of the study are preliminary. More investigation is warranted. One area not addressed is respondents' socioeconomic status. It's quite possible this played a role in determining which students opted to invest time in completing the survey, as well as shaping their attitudes. The study included all students who had taken SCI 207, regardless of how long ago they'd done so. In order to identify changes in environmental attitude resulting directly from the course, it would be helpful to offer the EAI as a pre- and post-survey directly to students enrolled in it. Results of the study were used to provide guidance for a course redesign, in which changes included the addition of a self-reflective journal component, a required nature experience documented in a creative way, and an environmental footprint reduction activity promoting sustainable everyday behaviors.